times, Bromham Rhodes and R.P. de Parys' first act had been refused by practically every responsible manager in London. As Oh, What a Life, it had failed to satisfy the directors of the Empire. Rechristened Wow Wow, it had been rejected by the Alhambra. The Hippodrome had refused to consider it even under the name of Hallo Cellar Flap. It was now called Pass Along Please, and, according to its authors, was a real revue. Roland was to learn as the days went on that in the world in which he was moving everything was real revue that was not a stunt or a corking effect. He floundered in a sea of real revue, stunts, and corking effects. As far as he could gather, the main difference between these things was that real revue was something which had been stolen from some previous English production, whereas a stunt or a corking effect was something which had been looted from New York. A judicious blend of these, he was given to understand, constituted the sort of thing the public wanted. Rehearsals began before, in Roland's opinion, his little army was properly supplied with ammunition. True, they had the first act, but even the authors agreed that it wanted bringing up to date in parts. They explained that it was, in a manner of speaking, their life work, that they had actually started it about 10 years ago, when they were careless lads. Inevitably it was spotted here and there with smart topical hits of the early years of the century, but that, they said, would be all right. They could freshen it up in a couple of evenings. It was simply a matter of deleting allusions to pro Boers and substituting lines about Marconi shares and mangel wurzels. It'll be all right, they assured Roland. This is real revue. In times of trouble there is always a point at which one may say, here is the beginning of the end. This point came with Roland at the commencement of the rehearsals. Till then he had not fully realized the terrible nature of the production for which he had made himself responsible. Moreover, it was rehearsals which gave him his first clear insight into the character of Miss Verepoint. Miss Verepoint was not at her best at rehearsals. For the first time, as he watched her, Roland found himself feeling that there was a case to be made out for the managers who had so consistently kept her in the background. Miss Verepoint, to use the technical term, threw her weight about. There were not many good lines in the script of Act One of Pass Along Please, but such as there were she reached out for and grabbed away from their owners, who retired into corners, scowling and muttering like dogs robbed of bones. She snubbed everybody, Roland included. Roland sat in the cold darkness of the stalls and watched her, panic-stricken. Like an icy wave it had swept over him what marriage with this girl would mean. He suddenly realized how essentially domestic his instincts really were. Life with Miss Verepoint would mean perpetual dinners at restaurants, bread-throwing suppers, motor rides, everything that he hated most. Yet, as a man of honor, he was tied to her. If the revue was a success, she would marry him, and revues, he knew, were always successes. At that very moment there were 6 best revues in London running at various theatres. He shuddered at the thought that in a few weeks there would be 7. He felt a longing for rural solitude. He wanted to be alone by himself for a day or two in a place where there were no papers with advertisements of revues, no grill rooms, and, above all, no Miss Billy Verepoint. That night he stole away to a Norfolk village where in happier days he had once spent a summer holiday, a peaceful, primitive place where the inhabitants could not have told real revue from a corking effect. Here, for the space of a week, Roland lay in hiding, whilst his quivering nerves gradually recovered tone. He returned to London, happier, but a little apprehensive. Beyond a brief telegram of farewell, he had not communicated with Miss Verepoint for 7 days, and experience had made him aware that she was a lady who demanded an adequate amount of attention. that his nervous system was not wholly restored to health was borne in upon him as he walked along Piccadilly on his way to his flat. For when somebody suddenly slapped him hard between the shoulder blades, he uttered a stifled yell and leaped in the air. Turning to face his assailant, he found himself meeting the genial gaze of Mr. Montague, his predecessor in the ownership of the Windsor Theatre. Mr. Montague was effusively friendly, and for some mysterious reason congratulatory. "You've done it, have you? You pulled it off, did you? And in the first month, by George! And I took you for a plain ordinary mug of commerce. My boy, you're as deep as they make 'em. Who'd have thought it, to look at you? It was the greatest idea anyone ever had, and staring me in the face all the time, and I never saw it. But I don't grudge it to you. You deserve it, my boy. You're a nut." "I really don't know what you mean." "Quite right, my boy," clucked Mr. Montague. "You're quite right to keep it up, even among friends. It don't do to risk anything, and least said, soonest mended." He went on his way, leaving Roland completely mystified. Voices from his sitting-room, among which he recognized the high note of Miss Verepoint, reminded him of the ordeal before him. He entered with what he hoped was a careless ease of manner, but his heart was beating fast. Since the opening of rehearsals he had acquired a wholesome respect for Miss Verepoint's tongue. She was sitting in his favourite chair. There were also present Bromham Rhodes and R.P. de Paris, who had made themselves completely at home with a couple of his cigars and whisky from the oldest bin. "So here you are at last," said Miss Verepoint querulously. "The valet told us you were expected back this morning, so we waited. Where on earth have you been to, running away like this without a word?" "I only went—" "Well, it doesn't matter where you went. The main point is, what are you going to do about it?" "We thought we'd better come along and talk it over," said R.P. de Paris. "Talk what over?" said Roland. "The review?" "Oh, don't try and be funny, for goodness' sake!" snapped Miss Verepoint. "It doesn't suit you. You haven't the right shape of head. What do you suppose we want to talk over? The theatre, of course." "What about the theatre?" Miss Verepoint looked searchingly at him. "Don't you ever read the papers?" "I haven't seen a paper since I went away." "Well, better have it quick and not waste time breaking it gently," said Miss Verepoint. "The theatre's been burned down. That's what's happened." "Burned down?" "Burned down?" repeated Roland. "That's what I said, didn't I? The suffragettes did it. They left copies of Votes for Women about the place. The silly asses set fire to 2 other theatres as well, and they happened to be in main thoroughfares, and the fire brigade got them under control at once. I suppose they couldn't find the Windsor. Anyhow, it's burnt to the ground, and what we want to know is what you're going to do about it." Roland was much too busy blessing the good angels of Kingsway to reply at once. R.P. de Paris, sympathetic soul, placed a wrong construction on his silence. "Poor old Rowley," he said. "It's quite broken him up. The best thing we can do is all go off and talk it over at the Savoy, over a bit of lunch." "Well," said Miss Verepoint, "what are you going to do? Rebuild the Windsor, or try to get another theatre?" The authors were all for rebuilding the Windsor. True, it would take time, but it would be more satisfactory in every way. Besides, at this time of the year, it would be no easy matter to secure another theatre at a moment's notice. To R.P. de Paris and Bromham Rhodes, the destruction of the Windsor Theatre had appeared less in the light of a disaster than as a direct intervention on the part of Providence. The completion of that tiresome second act, which had brooded over their lives like an ugly cloud, could now be postponed indefinitely. "Of course," said R.P. de Paris thoughtfully, "our contract with you makes it obligatory on you to produce our review by a certain date. But I dare say, Bromham, we could meet Rowley there, couldn't we?" "Sure," said Rhodes. "Something nominal. Say a further 500 on account of fees would satisfy us. I certainly think it would be better to rebuild the Windsor. Don't you, R.P.?" "I do," agreed R.P. de Paris cordially. "You see, Rowley, our review has been written to fit the Windsor. It would be very difficult to alter it for production in another theatre. Yes, I feel that rebuilding the Windsor would be your best course." There was a pause. "What do you think, Roly Poly?" asked Miss Verepoint.